Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for February 28th, 2025. As has been the case almost every day, there's so much going on. It's hard to encapsulate it in this format of the daily update, but I'm going to make an effort at giving you a true picture of something that's extremely important. But let me simply say that there's a lot that's going on that's important, and I would encourage you to join the International Peace Coalition call at 11 a.m. Eastern Time today, where there'll be a discussion of how to act at a moment of crisis involving the Ukraine situation and Southwest Asia, Gaza. The last almost 100 weeks, there's been a call every single week with a Zoom connection for people to engage in a discussion and to participate and listen to experts who are talking about how to address the current crisis. So I would encourage you, if you want to hear the latest on what's going on with Trump and Putin, with Netanyahu and Trump, with the BRICS and so on, join the call. I'll have a link in the description section for you so you can participate. But let me tell you what I want to talk about today. And that is the long overdue assault against U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID as it's known. It was launched by Elon Musk, and it's being portrayed in the media in what I would say is a false way to prevent people from actually drawing the proper conclusions. Namely, that shutting this down is an important step toward normalizing relations between the U.S. and Russia, but even more importantly, putting an end to one of the main tools used by the unipolar order to sustain the looting and the wars of the empire. Now, why do I say the media's got it wrong? Well, it's typical. What they want to do is divide you, in this case, between Democrats on the one side who say it's a wonderful humanitarian operation, and if you shut it down, children are going to die because they won't get their medication, people will starve, water will be dirty, and on and on and on. Typical goody two-shoes leftist approach. It is a leftist approach, but it's also false, because the other side of it, the Republican side, is to complain about foreign aid because it's a budget buster. It's too much money for nothing. Well, both of those are wrong. What's wrong with USAID is it's an instrument of the unipolar order to overthrow governments, to carry out regime change as color revolutions against any government or any country that doesn't submit to the unipolar order. That's why it has to be shut down. And what President Trump is doing is taking the right step. That what's been said, well, here's what happened. Essentially, USAID has been shut down and its functions are being transferred over to the State Department. There will be a thorough review to distinguish or to determine which programs actually are life-saving. And Secretary of State Rubio will be presiding over this to see which of the programs, whether it's medical care in Uganda, whether it's water projects in the Congo, whether it has to do with food going into Sudan or Somalia. There are some areas that are being funded that are useful. The problem is they have strings attached. They're related to demands that those countries that get the aid side with the United States. And that means open up their land for military bases, for mineral exploitation by U.S. firms, and so on. So even when they do good, it's for bad reason. Now, the best way to know this is to know who has been running USAID in the recent period, namely Samantha Power, who is a leading advocate of Tony Blair's approach to destroying the idea of national sovereignty. Blair came to the United States in 1999 and gave a speech at the Chicago World Affairs Council in which he said we have to get rid of the idea of the Peace of Westphalia. And what the Peace of Westphalia in 1648 said is that sovereign nations have a right to be protected for their own internal sovereign interests, but the way to have peace is to have mutual beneficial relations with their neighbors. So in other words, the golden rule when it comes to countries: do unto others as you would have them do to you. And in that process, you can then have the extension and protection of sovereignty. Blair said that's no good. In the modern world, we need what became known as the responsibility to protect, which is that the most powerful nations have a right to intervene when they think that there's something wrong with what a country's doing. Now, what does that mean? Well, look at Libya. The international human rights mafia went in and destroyed that country in the name of stopping Gaddafi from killing his own citizens, which was probably a lie. Gaddafi was doing a lot of good. And one of the things he was doing, besides providing fresh water for his population, was working toward a gold-backed system, a monetary system, that would function to unify Africa as an economic unity. So who was supporting the attack on Libya? Samantha Power, who was on the National Security Council of Obama, Hillary Clinton, Obama. And why? Well, because Gaddafi was not knuckling under to demands from the United States and the British, and the French were also a partner in this. Obama said the U.S. was leading from behind, which may have been his favorite position. But we do know that beyond that, what the United States did was launch a brutal attack on Libya, which destroyed the country. The country is now a complete wreck. It's in civil war. Now, that's Samantha Power's idea of human rights. And as she took over the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, she made sure that it continued to function as a regime change operation. Now, what do we mean by regime change? There's something called color revolution, whether it's the tulip revolution, the orange revolution in Ukraine. There are all sorts of designations, but what it basically means is that the pretext that's usually used is the charge that an election was unfair. Now, we know what happens when that's the case. We just saw it in Romania. Someone who was opposed to the U.S., NATO, European Union policy won the Romanian election, and it was annulled, and they're now trying to arrest him, to the cheers coming from the West. Why? Because Romania has a large U.S. base, including a missile defense base, which is part of the operation deployed against Russia. So where are the human rights mafia screaming about fair elections? They're saying in the name of democracy, we have to keep Georgescu out of the presidency of Romania. Well, that shows you how much contempt they have for actual democracy. Similarly, Samantha Power went to Hungary after Orban won a decisive victory in 2022. She went in February 2023 with buckets of cash to fund social media operations for freedom of the press, which means to give the opposition access to media to attack Orban. Now, Orban had previously, in 2018, kicked George Soros out. Soros runs a series of non-governmental organizations which work hand in hand with the CIA and with the Agency for International Development. So what you see here is Power would use the argument of unfair election, even if it was certified by European authorities as a fair election. They use that to recruit young people into opposition through social media, through providing jobs, through a number of ways, to then deploy them against the state, against the interests of the nation that voted for the current leaders. So that's what the color revolution is about. It's described as a way that the U.S. can assert its hegemony without having to send in the military, otherwise known as hybrid warfare, psychological brainwashing, manipulation, and so on. $60 billion of American taxpayers' money was going to the USAID. A large percentage of that was going to Ukraine to support the so-called Ukrainian democracy in a war against Russia. Now, what's important is that the Russians already know what color revolution is. So does most of the world. Most of the world has seen it over and over and over again. The Ukraine Maidan rebellion in 2014 was a color revolution, funded by Victoria Nuland, who was working hand in hand with Joe Biden, who was the point person for U.S. policy in Ukraine. They funded neo-Nazis. They funded fake media. They funded attacks on patriots. And then we've ended up with what? We've ended up with Zelensky, who's now coming to visit President Trump today to try to stop Trump from working to get peace in his own country. And the Europeans are all supporting Zelensky in continuing the war, despite the fact that Ukraine's younger population is being wiped out by this war. That's the nefarious side, the subversive side of the USAID, that it allies itself with forces that oppose the interests of the global majority. And in this case, in Eastern Europe, there's motion away from the European Union and away from NATO. It's not just Romania. It's in the Czech Republic. It's in Slovakia. It's in Serbia. It's in Hungary. Countries are saying, we don't like this idea of the Anglo-American rule. And so there's a shift going on. And what Trump did by going after this is not just stop the money from being paid out, but stop the operations of coups and color revolutions. That's what's important. By the weekend, I'll have my article on this up on the LaRouche Organization website. But in the meantime, let me remind you again, today at 11 a.m. Eastern will be the International Peace Coalition online call. If you can't make it live, it will be archived so you can get it. But this is where the fight is going on to bring about a shift away from a world in imperial warfare and geopolitical confrontation to actually the conditions where we can have mutually beneficial arrangements for all nations. So thanks for joining me today. Share this video. Get the word out. No to Soros, no to Samantha Power, no to color revolutions, and yes to the International Peace Coalition.